I'll start out with that. I can't say this one, but I'll say I'll go out. That's one of the things that's beautiful.
You know, when I told me that there was no process, so I dropped some stuff. Oh, yeah. And then I was in and outside waiting for the water shower. And somebody showed up with
Yes, there's a nice space.
They have their list. They're allowed to have these little signs.
It's almost 8:30, so we should start circulating. Oh, there's Renee. There's James.
Question mics are the same way. Should I leave them on for the meeting, or?
Yeah, you probably should. Let's see how this goes. So there's a problem right now. Okay, we're going to get started. Everyone take your seats. I don't think that's on it.
Hey, somebody's supposed to give me the gong.
Yes, where's the gong?
Who has the gong?
Who has the gong? Okay, guys, everyone take your seats. There'll be lots of time for the yakking later.
All the presentations.
Yeah. Okay.
Just depending on the day.
Can you just open the first one?
Okay. Good morning. I'd like to thank everyone for being here today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Lawrence. I'm the chair of League, and we are trying some new things this year. So I'm going to I'm going to follow the speaker's golden rule, and I'll just be short and then be seated because I'll say more tomorrow. You'll see more of me than you ever wanted to see tomorrow. We have some announcements. Let's see here. So this is your obligatory reminder that if you're a civil servant, you're still under the blackout. Please don't discuss anything relating to the commercial procurement. Please refrain from using the Wi-Fi. Even though we just showed the Wi-Fi password, you may experience slower than normal response times because everyone is checking their email instead of listening to me. There are overflow viewing rooms in the boardroom behind the receptionist's desk. So those are places which will be quieter than the main room here, and so if the room gets full or if you are having a good conversation, you can go in there and keep following what's going on here. We are trying some new things this year for the League meeting. This is one of them, where instead of having the usual potpourri, we're doing very deep dives into very important subjects, and nothing is more important than learning how to survive and operate through the lunar night. It's critical for everything we want to do on the moon, and we want to do a robust continuum of commercial, exploration, and science activities as called for by the Lunar Exploration Roadmap. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to the co-chairs of this special focus workshop, Andy Petro and Renee Weber.
Thank you, Sam. Welcome everyone to the Survive and Operate Through the Lunar Night workshop. Glad all of you could be here. We're really gratified that so many people made this a priority to come here today for this. And it's this workshop is jointly sponsored by the 3 mission directorates at NASA with a lot of help from the Survey, League, NASA Space Portal, and USRA, so we appreciate their help. My name's Andy Petro from NASA headquarters. This is Renee Weber, and I think we'll go ahead and look at the agenda. Renee will take us through that.
Hello, everybody. So this material is basically just copied from the workshop's website, and it's kind of giving just a high-level overview of what we're here to talk about, but we kind of have it split into 3 main phases. Today, in the morning discussion, we're going to talk about the expected needs and opportunities for science exploration and commercial operations. Then in the afternoon, we're going to talk about what's the current state of the art for power generation, storage, and distribution, and also thermal management. And then in the poster session, which will actually take place tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow evening, we're going to have folks presenting their novel concepts for power and thermal management systems. And the poster boards are out there now, and you're welcome to hang your poster whenever you want, although the formal session will be tomorrow. And then sort of the outcome from this meeting, what we actually expect to do with the discussion that will take place today, is to identify the gaps between mission needs and system capabilities for surviving and operating through the night, explore opportunities for public-private partnerships, and then summarize our findings in a report to NASA. And we actually have 2 note takers here today from NextGen, Chris and Anna, if you can raise your hands. They're going to be taking detailed notes about all the discussion that happens today. So if you really want something in that final report, I think they're accepting bribes. And here's our agenda. We're going to start with this welcome. Then we're going to have an overview of what the actual day-night environmental conditions on the moon are, lessons learned from previous missions that have survived the night, and then our morning panel, again, talking about requirements. So Andy, you want to talk about the second half?
Okay. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So in the afternoon, we'll have 2 panels, one on power and one on thermal, looking at the state of the art in terms of technology that will support what we might want to do on the moon, and as well as the technology gaps and the needs for development to go forward. And then we'll have a commercial panel, and then followed by a report from the International Space University summer session team that did a study of lunar night survival, and a very nice report that's available as well. We'll hear from them. And then we'll have our summary discussion at the end of the day. And as Renee mentioned, the poster session is tomorrow evening. However, some of the posters are already out there, so you can take a look at those in the meantime. One of the things we wanted to do to encourage participation above and beyond what discussion can occur in the room here is to provide some questions that provide more or less an outline for the report that we want to produce. I won't read these, but you know, they cover the basic objectives that Renee had talked about. And then what we have also done to encourage even more participation is there's a survey sheet. There's several outside and on the side tables. If you want to do by paper version, you can grab a copy of this. You can use it for your own notes, and then you can submit it to us. It'll help us gather additional input. There's also a SurveyMonkey survey online that you should have received a link to, and you can use that also to share your thoughts on these sort of overriding questions. So I think that completes the
And
introduction.
we'll put these questions up on this while we're actually having our panel discussions, just in case you run out of ideas to ask the panelists questions.
Yeah, okay. So Renee, you can
Okay, great.
introduce.
Okay, so our first presentation is going to be given by Brett Denevi. Where are you? There she is. From APL, and she's going to give the overview of lunar day and night environmental conditions. So, let's see if I can do this.
Might take a little bit. Oh, I just opened right out.
Take it away.
Okay. Do you think I can use this mic, or do I have to stand
Try
here?
it.
Like,
Yeah.
all right. Sorry, I like to pace around a little bit. Okay, so Renee and Andy asked me to give this talk, I think, to get us all on the same page about just what are the general environmental conditions that we are trying to survive here. And then we'll all go into later, why do we want to survive them? Why can't we get all our science done in a single day? And then, the how of surviving them. Okay, so we're just going to go through kind of the unique lunar environmental conditions. Some of the big ones being, of course, temperature variations, illumination considerations, and then just touching on kind of plasma charging processes. And then those really kind of key in on three unique areas or times, equatorial or really kind of just mid-latitude, day and night, the terminator, right, at dawn or dusk, and then the polar regions. So a lot of this information comes from the Diviner Lunar Radiometer experiment that's on the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. The PI of Diviner is here somewhere. The PI of Diviner is here somewhere, Dave Page, waving over there so you can ask him questions. Is this too loud now? No, okay. So that instrument measures bolometric brightness temperatures that are calculated from 7 channels between 8 and 400 microns, and then gives us this look at the surface, scrolling through here, where you have daytime maximums that are nearly 400 Kelvin. I've included Fahrenheit just for some more human reference for us Americans. And then the nighttime minimums right before sunrise that are around 95 Kelvin. Of course, those days last around 2 weeks, nights also 2 weeks. And these plots are from Jean-Pierre Williams, and they show how that varies by latitude. So as you can kind of see on the previous slide, you don't, until you get to very high latitudes, you don't buy yourself a lot of relief from noon. And is there a pointer here? Well, there's so many screens, pointing might not be effective. But you can see at these the low latitudes that are, this increases in latitude as you go down here, you have pretty steep curves here, and then it's not until you start getting to, really above 60 degrees decrease. And then as you get toward the poles, you have lower, of course, noon maximums, but also a ton of variability, which you can see here by the standard deviations, the error bars. And then this plot just shows those standard deviations, and you essentially have the order flipped, where you have so much variability at the poles, and towards the equator, minimal variability by longitude. Another way to look at this is just showing the maximum and the minimum temperatures at each location. So on the bottom there is where you start to see some of the variation coming out that is due to the geology, the properties of the surface, mostly the rockiness, so in fresh craters where you have big areas of impact melt or blocky surroundings, you can see some of those craters peeking out. And then this difference map here, nighttime temperature difference map, really highlights those areas that have the non-standard thermal conditions. There are some very small regions that do have a more temperate nighttime. This is an example here. Those arrows are pointing to a small crater, and you can see in the temperatures versus the just a wide-angle camera image that you do have some little hot spots here. This plot shows this crater here, and you can see it compared to Viking lander data. And the nighttime isn't down around 100 Kelvin, it's up more around Mars nighttime kind of conditions. You don't escape the brutal noon temperatures, but hey, that's not so bad. Of course, nothing is perfect. This is that crater. You have 20-degree slopes, and those are covered with boulders 20 meters and up and down. So, if you can find a way to, perhaps land right down in one of these tiny smooth spots or nestle in among the boulders, you can have a toastier night. For the illumination considerations, of course, one of the big ones that we are here to discuss is the fact that you have very long periods with no direct solar illumination, so power challenges, of course. It's important to still note, though, for kind of operational purposes, there are significant sources of illumination, even at night. There's earthshine. The reason that you can see features on the moon on the night side in the sky, that reflected light coming from the Earth. Lyman alpha, zodiacal light. I don't know, I didn't have time to fact check this, but Paul Sputis liked to say that earthshine is equivalent to a 60-watt bulb 6 feet overhead, so not insignificant. When you get toward the terminator, you have, of course, a special environment. Part of that comes from just the contrast over a short distance that you're seeing. So on the day side, you have a positively charged surface. You can see in this diagram from Tim Stubbs, you can ignore some of this extra crazy stuff going on here, but this main thing to note is here, all these pluses on this side. And so that's coming from UV radiation that is kicking off electrons from the surface, from the photoelectric effect. And that's contrasted with on the night side where you have a negatively charged surface. The night side is in the wake of the plasma coming from the sun, so the solar wind, lots of protons and electrons. And those electrons are lighter, so they can actually start to fill in that wake, and the night side becomes negatively charged. So then at the terminator, where those two regions meet, you have a large potential difference over a short distance, and that can lead to a strong electric field. I tried to figure out quickly how strong is that, and apparently that is not super well characterized. That can lead to uneven charging of spacecraft, so if you have two different spacecraft coming together on the surface, you have to worry about charging and grounding. There's always this kind of hard to kill idea about dust at the terminator, potentially being lofted by these electrostatic forces. We haven't really seen a lot of evidence for that, but we also have not totally ruled this out as a concern, so it remains. Also, at the Terminator, you definitely have very extreme illumination conditions, which is not a showstopper, but it is something that will make operations a bit more challenging in some cases. And then you move on to the poles, where of course you have the most extremes of illumination conditions. We have observations for many years now from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera, wide and narrow angle cameras, just collecting continual images over the poles. So we've very well characterized that illumination conditions across each location. That movie will play for like 10 more minutes if I let it. So I'm just pulled a few frames out showing basically a seasonal difference. So this is showing Whipple and Peary craters when the subsolar longitude is 150 degrees east, but then the subsolar latitude is changing. So just an example of how you move through these changes. I'll just scroll through those again. It's always fun to look at. If you kind of compile those all together, you can get an average of how often is the surface illuminated. The north and south poles here, this is just 88 to 90 degrees shown in a polar projection. One of the discoveries is that at this higher resolution, there are no peaks of eternal light. There are small regions, it kind of depends on how large you define your area, but 0.01 square kilometers that are illuminated up to 72% of the year. If you increase the point where you're measuring to 2 meters above the surface, so something pretty reasonable for where solar panel heights may be, that increases to 86% of the year where you have illumination in some regions of the poles. And then again, if you add in mobility, even just a small amount of mobility, you can increase that even farther. This is an example from Spire and Robinson, where this is the rim of Shackleton, and if you move along this, following the rim here of Shackleton, following the light, you can get over 90% illumination. This is an oblique view of the rim of Shackleton. It looks very scary, like you're marching along a cliff on both sides here. But the two opposite illumination views show that you're not going to fall into an abyss.
That was 90%.
A little over 90%. Here's another example where if you do a detailed kind of traverse planning, you can increase that even further to really limit the duration of your longest eclipse. I'm going to play this little movie here if I can, yeah. So, I probably should have explained that before I started it, but this little green and red moving dot is an example traverse of a rover where whenever it's green, it is in sunlight. Whenever it's red, it's in shadow. So if you take the very high resolution topography information that we have, the detailed knowledge of the illumination conditions, and you add, here I'll just play that again, and you add that together, you can get kind of a preferred route that will really limit the amount of time that you're in darkness, in this case to 100 hours. And you can see the time frame there over a year. All right, we'll move on, if I can. The poles are not just in extremes of illumination, but by corollary temperature as well. So this is a movie from Dave Page from Diviners showing the South Pole. Shoemaker, Hayworth, Faustini, I think, are our three friends here. If I'm remembering that correctly. So this is a model based on our knowledge of the thermal conditions, just showing how those change. And one of the reasons we love the poles, they are so cold. The purple there, the numbers are getting down to 20K and below. Whereas you still have pretty warm temperatures. This is 200, relatively warm, over 250 Kelvin in the areas that are illuminated. Another way to look at this is just comparing the South Pole. For the South Pole, the winter time min, mean, and max. And the summer, where you have some slight changes due to the season. But Jean-Pierre Williams has a poster on this that will be up, so we can you can examine this further and talk to Dave Page. Jean-Pierre is from LA and is making sure his house doesn't burn down currently, so he will not be here. Sorry. So other considerations at the poles, you do have a similar situation where you have electrons can more easily fill in the wake, where you have the solar wind kind of skimming the surface, hitting topographic barriers. The electrons can kind of divert into that permanently shadowed regions, whereas the protons don't so much. So just something that can be kept in mind. Sam told me I had to say something else positive, so you get free cryogenic storage. Fantastic. Bonus. No need for active cooling of your instruments. Great for all kinds of astronomy. So to summarize, we do have all of these distinct considerations that we have to keep in mind in each of these locations. But we understand them very well. That was, one of the main drivers for the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. It was designed to provide all of this information that would be needed for future surface exploration and operations. And so none of these are, conditions that we can't overcome. And I think we just need to keep in mind that, we can do this. This is a challenge, and we can do it. So it's easy to talk about all of the challenges and become fixated and stuck on those, but yeah, these are overcomable. All right, thanks. Okay.
I presume you want to speak.
Oh, there's something that you're supposed to pass around.
So Dean Epler, Aerospace Corporation, that 6 foot, 60 watt bulb is work I did in 1990. I'm responsible for that.
Fantastic.
It's in a TMX that was published long before most people in this room are alive. And the first time it's really seen the light of day is a poster that's just hung out. But the thing I think that's important is rather than think about a 60 watt bulb, everybody that lives in some place that has summer, about middle of July, about 8 in the evening, is what Earthshine is like. And John Young told me that from orbit in Earthshine, you can see color differences on the lunar surface. You can actually see them from 100 kilometers in Earthshine. So it's really remarkably bright. At the sub-Earth point, as you move away from that, it gets progressively poorer. But that's in that poster, so I'm doing a shameless plug for my poster.
Perfect. Thanks. And yeah, I think sometimes There are cases where, you know, operating in the night under those kinds of illumination conditions can be simpler than, you know, the very extreme conditions that can occur in early or late in the day.
Okay. All right, at this time, I would like to welcome up our next speaker, Ron Creel. Some of you may know him as Roving Ron. He worked on the Apollo lunar rovers, the ones the astronauts drove around in. And he's going to give us a presentation on lessons learned from missions that have survived and operated through the lunar night. Ron, take it away.
I'll try to speak, y'all. First off, about the shirt. As I sent a note to Renee, we just went out to California to see our first grandson in San Carlos. We got away just before the fires. And my wife made a little outfit up that matches this shirt. And I thought it was appropriate to bring it and to share with y'all. It's amazing that life goes on. His name is Calvin Apollo. So my daughter-in-law, she took my advice and she actually named him, and I hope that he's able to share it with y'all in the future here after I'm long gone. I do note here in my first slide that one of my sources was the report that the Next Gen folks did, I believe, Lunar Science for Landing Missions, and it emphasizes the two underlying statements that. Well, it seems to be a critical area. It's distance. You have to get about here. We do need to do these temperature screens that Brett was talking about, to deal with those, and also hope for some operation during the lunar night. I'll show you the one system that actually did that. A little background, as Renee said, I like to throw this in here that we did put 3 rovers on the moon, and we operated in the lunar morning, shown on the lower left side. This is me at Mission Control 46 years ago. That's the thing about this. 46 years ago, and as I was talking to Joe a little earlier, Mission Control is very, very good, and they want you to be beyond that and responding to them for questions they've got and for performance issues. And we got to where we were fairly good. If you look at the plot on the lower right side, you'll see that we were progressing. Well, pointer doesn't work for all screens. Pointer doesn't work for all screens. We were with the dust on the radiators, and Gene Cernan trying to clean off, and John Young and Dave Scott also. We just had an example there of dust was prevalent. If you brush it off, you still have 5 times the solar absorbance of a clean surface. You never got any better than that. So we started off the 3rd EVA. We were on a path that said that, hey, we're going to be hitting our maximum temperature about midway through the EVA, about a 6-hour EVA. So we didn't violate, but we changed the rules, and we had them open up the dust covers at the red mark there. And this shows you how good the simulations are got. The thing I'd like to stress here is simulations by themselves. Simulations by themselves are good. However, if you don't have I'll try to talk from here. I have to bend over. So what you see there is that we had them with the good simulations. If you don't have simulations that are correlated with test data, real test data, you're kidding yourself. But we got to the point where we got very, very good, and Mission Control could depend upon us to make decisions. The decision was to open the covers and to have better radiation. Now, as I said, we were in the mornings. We also had a 4th rover. People don't know much about this. Apollo 18, we were actively pursuing Apollo 18 with the 4th rover. And we were even looking at, could we carry along a little trailer behind it? And after the astronauts left the moon, could they then activate that trailer? You notice the trailer had an RTG on it, radioisotope thermoelectric generator. And that'd be a SNAP 27, which I'll talk a little bit about in a little bit. We did those studies. Unfortunately, Apollo 18 fell by the wayside. Is Jack here? Jack. Jack was the originally on Apollo 18. He was bumped forward to Apollo 17. And so Apollo 18 died primarily due to funding. We had something going on called the Vietnam War, which was draining the budget. And a general, been there, done that attitude at that time, I think, was the way I'd summarize it. Kind of that said, hey, you've been there and done it, not a compelling reason to continue on. You've beaten the Russians to the moon, and it's over. That was over. So that was back in 1970. We actually did studies on that. And then I led a panel at a Space Development Conference in 2004 with those notable people, including Roger Lunar from Sandia, Tom Kessler from Boeing, and Jaime Bass from Lockheed. We introduced that subject. You'll see a recurrence here of what I call the incarnation of let's go back to the moon processes. There was one in the early 2000s, one later on in 2000s, and now we're into probably the third or fourth incarnation of a vision for going back to the moon. I hope it works out, but you got to solve some of these issues like lunar night, or you won't have a reasonable expectation. Then in 2006, I participated with John Elliott at JPL in a little study. This is the early version of their multi-mission RTGs on the back of a rover. They were somewhat smaller than the one that finally flew on Curiosity. And that shows that we were actually looking at ways to perform and to endure the lunar night and operate even back then. And down here on the lower left, I've tried to show that when you talk about non-nuclear, we tried a program called Night Rover in 2012 and 2013. Sam Ortega was the manager of that project for NASA. And what we found was we got all ready to do some testing at Glenn Research Center in their vacuum chamber, but we couldn't get any of the commercial sponsors to sign up to really do it. We had prizes for 300 watt-hours per kilogram, 400 and 500, which were doubling and tripling the amount of capability that we had before. On the rovers on the moon, they were about 130, 140 watt-hours per kilogram. We were trying to double that, as you see in that curve. The curve down the lower left shows that we needed about 250 watt-hours per kilogram in order to survive, to keep that system at that weight and at about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Talk about temperatures. You want to talk about those? You'll see in all the documentation, all 4 temperature schemes presented in different reports, back and forth. We tried, I'll tell the story here. They came across here, we're going to metricize the shuttle development. We're going to take it over to the Celsius, over to that region. And the bill came in at 2 to 3 times the cost. So NASA did not do that, but justifiably so. So we got 4 different schemes. You'll see mainly degrees Fahrenheit here. That study, as I said, industry did not have a commercial viability for the extended storage. So we couldn't get any commercial people to finally sign up to do the test program at Glenn Research Center. Then, but most recently, and back in 2017, I did a poster, and I guess that helped to prod people back and get an invitation from Renee to come and talk to y'all. Now let's get into the body of the story. Background. This is a summary of the 20 landings on the moon. There have been 20 successful landings on the moon. 8 by the Russians, 11 by us, the Americans, and 1 by the Chinese. I won't dwell too much on the Chinese because I can't find out a whole lot of information about their system. Suffice to say that it sat there, it did provide data, the lander provided data for quite a while. However, the rover did not work after the first lunar day. It shut down and did not move. So that's a lesson learned, I guess. We'll talk about that. Of the Russian, let's talk about the Russian program first. I'll talk more details about the Lunacods because I've been to Russia to their facility. The Lunacods, they had 8 landings called the Lunar program. On 2 of those, they had a little rover. It wasn't that little. It weighed about 4 times what our moon rovers weighed, but about roughly the same size. on those two rovers. I tried to relate this to you. You'll see the green colors. The greens are lunar night periods where he survived. The blue is where he actually operated. You'll see that the only operation was actually on the ALSEPs, the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment packages. The others portrayed here: Surveyor, the Russian Lunokhod, and the Chinese. They don't get much credit for having actually operated during the lunar night. But you'll see that the Russians. We'll talk more details about these systems. I think this is a good overall view of what went on for y'all to put your records. Talk Surveyor first. Surveyor was a program that said had 5 landings. You'll see here what I've underlined are that we got some survival and operation into the first few nights, up to 40, 80 hours. Even on one mission on Surveyor 5, they actually had 215 hours for the second lunar night. However, none of them went beyond 2 lunar nights. And one of them, Surveyor 3, shut down about 2 hours after the first lunar day and never came back on, which is why, go back to this one, this is probably why it was a very good candidate for Apollo 12 to go and visit and take off equipment and to actually use that equipment and to bring that equipment back to the moon, back to the Earth. And so this summary down here is that solar panels and battery charging did not provide sustainable and repeatable night survival and operation. This is a good evidence for that. Now then, I was sitting there after Apollo 15 at my desk. We were absorbing, hey, we've done fairly well. We didn't get the cooling that we'd like to get, but we were doing fairly well. They actually cut the mission a little bit short, so motors were cool, everything was great. And on my desk one day appears this document that I couldn't believe. We were in the Cold War with the Russians at the time. And hence, there was not much. All I was getting was Aviation Week and Space Technology articles saying that they put a little rover on the moon. And I was wondering about that rover. I got a document put on my desk. It was a translation that told me everything I wanted to know about it. I couldn't believe it, you know. And it told a story that they had a polonium-210, which has a half-life of 138 days. And hence it went about 11 months maximum operation on the moon. They had 2 of these rovers. They had an ingenious system here where they have back end. They had a heater element, and they would run it. They would run air by it, have a ventilation system with fans, and that's how they survived the lunar night with this system. And you'll see, I even got plots. I can pull out plots there of the temperature range, which to us thermal people showed, hey, these guys really know what they're doing. And it may have pointed us at the time. It made us regret that Apollo 18 was canceled, that the rover was canceled at that time, and because we had good evidence that it would work. You see the relative size of their Lunokhod versus our rover and the astronaut. So that's how they're heating it. They talked to General Dubkin, the man that actually joysticked the Lunokhod on the moon. I asked him, I said, hey, I went to their facility back over in St. Petersburg, and I asked him, I said, hey, why did you only go 4 months on the second mission? Well, that appears to have been, what he tells me was, they had a shift in the command center, a shift of personnel shift. And as such, a different group came in that wasn't familiar. As they rode around the moon, their cover was open. The solar array is on the inside of the cover. The radiator is on the horizontal surface. Okay, they were driving around, and they got into a situation where they went down inside a crater, and when they were down inside the crater, they panicked, and they tried to get back out. They were sliding, so they panicked. They hit the side of the crater with that solar panel, dumped a bunch of lunar regolith in on the radiator. That caused them to overheat. That's why the second rover, it should have lasted 11 months, but it only lasted 4 months. But I thought this was great. This allowed me later on with the onset of the internet. I was able to make contact with them, and I got invited to go over there and brief the Apollo rover, to the folks in Russia. This is what 2004. This is a picture taken in their facility of me and one of their main engineers, Mikhail Melnikov, describing to me about the operation. I've since asked him, based upon coming to this conference here, 2 other questions I had was, how did he have their, we talked about the electronics assembly was inside that container with the isotope heater. how do they keep their motors out there on the perimeter? See the little white motor there out there on the wheel? There was 8 of those. How do they keep that? How do they survive? He says they're underlined there, the right choice of construction lubricants. Yeah, they're kind of terse in a way, but he did say that the lesson learned for you is it took them 2 full days, 2 full lunar days, 2 24-hour periods to let it sit there and heat up before they try to move, which I think is a good lesson learned here. And maybe the Chinese maybe should have done that. I don't know what happened with their system. But also, he talked very much about, I asked him about, this is not cooling, I said, what about, I heard that they had to shut down when they got to the noontime period. He did verify that indeed they had to be very, very careful. They got washed out with their TV cameras. Maybe they work out different. They really relied upon the morning and the later afternoon periods when they got good shadows so they can negotiate around craters and such. And they did quite a job. They actually hold the land record on the moon with the lunar cod. That second lunar cod, they were actually going too fast, as we saw with the accident they had. They were pushing it. They were pushing it because they've already lost the battle to get to the moon. That's 2 things I learned. That's General Duggan at the console. They were very good hosts, and they've asked me to come back. I wear my Lunar cod pin that they gave me, and they've asked me to come back in November of 2020 to a celebration they're going to have in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Now, let's talk about the most successful system. The most successful system was the ALSA, Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment Packages. Those lasted for several years and only were shut down in 1977 because of budget concern. And actually, I think at the time they'd also collected so much data. I don't know if they knew what to do with the data. We used tapes back in those days. You were compiling volumes of buildings full of tapes. And then, by the way, I've gone back and tried to get some data off some tapes later, and the tape was corrupted. And so y'all have a whole lot better system now of storing data when you get it out than we had back in those days. And this is a compilation showing that indeed on the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiment, I learned one thing I didn't know before was actually on Apollo 11 they had radioisotope heater units. Unfortunately, they shut down very early after the astronauts left, after the first lunar day on that system. They actually had 15-watt radioisotope heater units, not RTGs. First RTG was on Apollo 12, and the RTG is shown in the picture here. The central station is shown in gold, and the RTG was off to the side. A seismometer is shown spread out on the moon. And you can see the difference it makes in the temperatures there between the time when sunset occurs as to the external temperature and the internal temperature, able to maintain that in a fairly benign environment. SNAP stands for System for Nuclear Auxiliary Power. And these are the SNAP 27s. And the night periods, 98 night periods, that's 98 times 14.75. And the only reason they shut down here, 98 down to 60, was because of budgetary constraints and changing priorities. Now let's get to the summary, the conclusions. Based upon what I've told y'all up to now, night survival and operation present considerable challenges, as Brett said, for moon exploration crews and equipment. Solar energy and batteries provided unreliable survival and operation for the Surveyor exploration spacecraft. The night rover competitors did not see marketability of the extended energy storage technology outside of NASA. Then, the longest past success was experienced with use of nuclear energy systems for power and thermal control. On the Russian lunar cods and stationary lunar cod, mobile lunar cods, stationary ALSET survived and operated for many lunar night periods using radioisotope generators and RHUs, radioisotope heater units. I still give a judgment here that the Chinese systems, to my way of thinking, only semi-survived. They did not fully survive. Now, nuclear energy sources can provide the lowest weight systems for required lunar survival and mobility. Non-nuclear systems require large solar panels, batteries, and energy storage capability. They also are limiting as far as mobility. Mobility is what it's about. You don't go to the moon here just to sample in one area. That's why we had the rovers, and why rovers will be very important in the future. You need to be able to move around and to move from a site to another site to exploration. We even looked at hoppers on the moon back in the day. Had fully, like the James Bond backpack systems, to try to hop around and go to different sites. And in fact, the lunar module was first called the Lunar Excursion Module because they thought it would land, move off, and go to another area. Well, they gave that up when they figured out that they didn't have enough fuel to do that. And then also that it was dangerous. You've done one dangerous, challenging landing. Why try to do another one? Get down, drive around at most here. Don't try to incorporate hoppers. We did look at hoppers. Now, I think, as I said before here, future efforts. Oh, I want to mention y'all. Brett talked about. Was there any evidence? There is evidence here that the laser retroreflector systems that are on the moon, that they have, up until the time, well, two things. The temperatures on the surveyors were increasing over those time periods I talked about until they shut off in 1977. Most likely because of the sunrise. There's nothing else I know of that causes dust to be elevated and then come back down. But it's theorized here about, and we see some evidence of the sunrise occurring. Also, there are indications that the laser ranging retroreflectors that are put on the moon. There are three sets of laser, what we call retroreflector units put on the moon. They're called 11, 14, and 15. There was evidence here that accumulated dust had continued to cause them to elevate temperature. Temperature is rising. Not a whole lot, but it does rise on occasion. Okay. I would like to emphasize here especially that future efforts and test verified designs are required for successful lunar night survival and operation. Thermal vacuum test correlated thermal modeling is vital for exploration mission support and success. I can't stress that enough to y'all that you can't simulate everything in the computers. You've got to have some tests behind it, some real meaningful testing. And I do expect a good workshop here today to discuss the options for lunar night survival and operation. I'll take some questions if y'all have them.
So, John Brunner from Johnson Space Center. I hope in this panel today we talk about how these nuclear systems might be available to commercial types, because everything here are national space agencies, and polonium and other radioactive things just aren't available out there on the open market. And we want to have a lot of commercial activity on the moon, so we're going to have to figure out how to do this legally.
And Clark, JPL, on your comment about nuclear options being, okay, even I have to stand away from that. Okay, the lowest wave systems. You know, there's been a lot of technology developments over the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades, 4 decades, 50 years since we were there. There's been a lot of work to make very efficient panels that stow to extremely small volumes, for example. There's a lot of work on very, very efficient, super efficient thermal components and MLI, even MLI packaging. So I think one of the things that'll be interesting, you can comment on this in the discussion, is to talk about the newer technologies, especially over the last 10 years. One of the reasons, by the way, is interesting, because of the extreme thermal challenges of extremely compact spacecraft. And that meant that getting rid of heat became a problem. And when getting rid of heat and keeping heat, well, that's kind of just the reverse of the same problem. So there's been a lot of work, and I think we may find, in fact, that we do have some solutions, especially for small things, which were challenging because of the very high surface area to volume ratio. If you can carry a lot of mass and the volume, it isn't an issue. But so I think, would you like to comment on that, or maybe not? I just wanted to make a comment that that's going to be very interesting.
Those are good comments, I just still think that even at 30 or 40% efficiency on a solar array, it's still going to have to be fairly large once you have unfolded. And then the mechanisms to do the unfolding don't have a man there or a woman there to actually do the unfolding. So all that's got to be built in to unfold it, fold it back. That's complication that you've got to account for.
Michael Sims from Series Robotics. Can you say something about the communication from the ALSEP? Did it have its own radio?
On the ALSEP, they certainly did have communication to telemeter data back, and I'm not the expert on that, but they did, as I said, they did tend to find that they almost had too much data at times.
and they have the capability to sort through it. We've got such high-speed computers now that you can sort through that data in much quicker fashion.
Hi, Lee Mason, NASA headquarters. You talked about the benefits of nuclear, but you didn't mention power levels. So, like the SNAP 27 RTGs, those were only 70 watts, I think. How much power do you think we're going to need in these future missions?
You need kilowatts. You need kilopower. It's all about weight. It's all about weight. It's about weight. Not W-A-I-T, W-E-I-G-H-T, weight. What's your weight system? And in our case, our rovers weighed 460 pounds, and we had 10 pounds for thermal control. 10 pounds for thermal control. So we came up with some ingenious wax boxes, which, by the way, the Johnson people also had on the communications unit a set of wax boxes. And we also had the great involvement of the astronauts there to try to clean radiators and to open covers on radiators. And that's what's up. I think your large set of initial going back to the moon is going to be robotic systems, obviously, here. To take men back to the moon is a tremendous challenge. And above and beyond, I don't know how to relate it there, 10, 20 times, 100 times more challenging than the robotic system. But it could be done. Next question, yep.
This is Alex Ignatieff, Lunar Resources at the University of Houston. As people have mentioned, technology has moved forward a lot in the last 40 years. And there's something out there now that's been around for the last 10 or 15 years called high temperature superconductivity, and one can store energy in a magnetic field in a superconducting coil. And these superconducting coils now can operate at 70 degrees Kelvin, 80 degrees Kelvin. So in the permanently shadowed craters, or the cold spots of the moon, you can set up a current in a superconducting coil. It'll be there forever, and you extract off the energy as needed. It's a great storage process. And we're working now with NASA Johnson to move that forward.
Are you also working power beaming?
That can be done also.
But what's your TRL? What's your TRL on all these systems? I guess that gets down to that place. What's your technology readiness?
Well, TRL for superconductivity and superconducting coils is 8. On the moon is a different question. Okay? However, it's perfect. The moon is a vacuum. I don't need a vacuum containment vessel, and the moon is craters are cold, so it's all possible. Yeah.
Just talking about the power for surface vehicles, we recharged the JSE SEV at Desert Rats. It was 16 kilowatts over several hours just for that SEV. So you're right, it's tens of kilowatts we need.
Okay, so next we're going to move into the morning panel portion of the meeting, and Sam Lawrence from JSC is going to give us an overview presentation, sort of an outbreak of some strategic activities that happened earlier this year. Those were the ASM SAT, which is Advancing Science of the Moon, and Next SAT, which was Next Steps on the Moon. And these activities were intended to update the 2007 SCEM report, the scientific context for the exploration of the moon. And he's going to show that. And then after that, Ben Bussey, Ben, are you here? Over there? We'll get up and talk about the league strategic knowledge gaps, which will then, both Sam and Ben's presentations will be used to frame our panel discussions. So I'll ask my 4 panelists, after Ben is done talking, to come up and sit in these chairs. And then we're basically just going to have, open discussion, ask all of the burning questions that you have about the science, side of returning to the moon, or requirements as far as science and human exploration. And then in the afternoon, we're going to talk in a lot more detail about all these burning technology questions that were just presented. Okay, take it away, Sam. But in the middle of the panel, we're going to have a coffee break, so be patient.
Get in between the scientists and their coffee. All right, so I was asked to provide a perspective and a little bit of a high-level overview about the so-called quote-unquote science perspective for the next steps on the moon. Now, I typically don't like to put up the artificial barriers between human exploration and science because what we really want is a continuum, a robust continuum of surface activities that enables commercial activity, enhances national security, and promotes scientific discovery, but they're all not mutually exclusive. So in 2017 and 2018, we had its busiest year in about 15 years, and we used the United States Lunar Exploration Roadmap as a springboard to perform a series of studies designed to take a comprehensive look at the current state of lunar exploration and lay the foundations for the future. We had the very successful Back to the Moon workshop in October of 2017. We executed the Advancing Science of the Moon Special Action Team over the summer of 2017, the Next Steps on the Moon Special Action Team, the League ISEG Volatile Special Action Team number 2. They liked the first one so much, they had the second one, and the Lunar Science for Landed Missions Workshop in January of 2018. Taken together, these documents provide a cohesive framework for profound discovery. And let's go through what some of them said. Okay, so this hasn't really been brought up a lot in the context of the implementation of Presidential Space Policy Directive number 1. Nevertheless, as we start to look at the details, the United States Lunar Exploration Roadmap, more or less all stuff we're discussing, is already in there. And so we can use that as a springboard very successfully. So this was developed at the request of the NASA Advisory Council over a 3-year period. It is the definitive plan to decisively enable lunar science, commercial activity, and human exploration. Surviving and operating through the lunar night is a key component of the Lunar Exploration Roadmap. Oh, and one of the other things. So I committed the meeting planning faux pas of having the same talk on consecutive days. So I'm going to talk about this tomorrow in the decadal session in a bit more detail. Today we're going to focus the topic on what is required from a science perspective to survive the lunar night. So anyway, the nighttime operations essential for sustained service presence are called for explicitly by the Lunar Exploration Roadmap. And there's a number of relevant Lunar Exploration Roadmap investigations, which include astrophysics and heliophysics observations from the moon, a lunar geophysical network, a surface station to assess over a long duration of time the near-surface plasma environment and dust environment. The explicitly calls for the testing of surface fission power systems. Lee, it's in there already. And to test rechargeable energy storage technologies for fixed and mobile surface applications. So in 2007, in the context of the Vision for Space Exploration, NASA headquarters, the Associate Administrator for SND, commissioned the National Research Council to create the scientific context for the exploration of the Moon Report. It was designed to provide guidance on the science enabled by the Vision for Space Exploration. NASA needs the idea was to provide a comprehensive, well-validated, and prioritized set of scientific research objectives for lunar exploration. The U.S. Lunar Exploration Roadmap essentially adopted the skin prioritization objectives for the science component. It's incorporated by reference in that. And these are the scientific priorities from the 2007 NRC report. Understanding the bombardment history of the inner solar system. Understand the structure and composition of the lunar interior. Understand the diversity of lunar crustal rocks. Understand the volatile environment, the distribution and lateral extent of volatiles and lunar poles. Understand lunar volcanism. Understand the impact Understand the impact process on planetary scales using the moon as a laboratory. Understand understand regolith processes in space weathering on anhydrous airless bodies. And understand the dust environment in lunar and the moon's surface-bound exosphere. And these are the top 11 goals called out by the NRC report. And I took the liberty, the ones highlighted in teal are the ones where you really do need the capability to survive and operate through the lunar night. So understanding the composition and distribution of polar volatiles almost explicitly depends on nighttime survival because you need to understand the lateral distribution and heterogeneity of the volatile environment in the polar regions. Understanding the thickness of the crust and the variability of the crust depends on a long-lived geophysical network. Similar to what we had on Apollo, except I would trust this time we'll put one on the far side also. Understand the stratification of the mantle also requires a geophysical network. Measure the lunar atmosphere over long periods of time. Is there really dust transport? There is conflicting physical evidence on this. What is the electrostatic environment along the terminator? These are important questions that require essentially you to operate through the lunar night. What is the size, composition, and current state of the core? So it became clear a couple years ago, or last year, to PSD that the moon was going to be coming back in focus. So the Advancing Science of the Moon Special Action Team was requested by Jim Green at the Planetary Science Division, and the goal was to evaluate the progress on lunar science goals since the 2007 NRC report. We were supposed to consider concepts related to science implementation and secondary science opportunities outlined in the original report, and note any new lunar science concepts that have become evident since 2007. Each section ends with a concise summary of the progress that is needed. We also made no effort to reprioritize. It was just too bridge too far for this group. However, this was the largest and most complicated activity League had ever done. We brought in 30 people, the best lunar scientists in the world, and although there is a perception out there that League is just people sitting in a room expressing their opinions to one another and walking it down, writing it down, we actually make an honest effort to balance institutional conflicts and make sure we have a balanced perspective that is designed to essentially represent an authoritative community consensus. So the outcome, so I'm going to talk about all this tomorrow. So just, believe me, you've got a lot more of this coming tomorrow. But the concepts and goals outlined in the report, the 2007 report, remain relevant even after a decade of progress in lunar science. All goals, however, had at least some progress, but none were quote-unquote done. There have been new concepts that have emerged, and those were understanding the lunar water cycle. So keep in mind the NRC report 2007 was written before LRO got to the moon. And while the Japanese were still processing and digesting the results from their spacecraft, and Chandrayaan hadn't got to the moon yet either. So in many respects, the report offers an interesting snapshot into what we thought. The 2007 report is a snapshot into what we thought about the moon about a decade. And now, after a decade of progress, we identified three sort of new concepts that none of which really fit cleanly into the existing framework of the NRC report. That is, understand the quote-unquote lunar water cycle, how hydroxyl moves as a function of time. Doing that will require the capabilities to survive the lunar night. Understand the origin of the moon, and specifically understand how the moon's interior is so enriched in volatiles. The previous, or by so enriched, I mean it's not bone dry. There's now some volatiles in the interior, and that actually causes problems for models of lunar formation. But I resolutely maintain that if an observation conflicts with a theoretical model, one ought to fix the theoretical model. So this is an interesting scenario to be in. And we also need to understand lunar tectonism. So the LRO has uncovered very compelling evidence that the moon is still tectonically active. We've uncovered hundreds of lobate scarps all across the face of the moon, and these are important destinations for future robotic moon exploration. Finally, science from the moon has enormous potential for astrophysics and heliophysics. That was true in 2007 and it remains true now. Landed missions are therefore required to do and execute the program and figure out these questions called out by the 2007 report. We have to get back to the lunar surface. Orbit, there are still important advances that can be made from orbit, but we got to get our boots dirty. We need humans and we need robots on the surface of the moon as quickly as possible. So there is lots of work left to do. As part of the ASMSAT activity, we were also asked to consider future missions, and it was pretty funny for me, as the person who led the activity, that we are essentially a very self-calibrating group, apparently as lunar scientists. We're not good at asking for what we really want. So what happened was, after 8 years of having the moon be blacklisted, essentially, we were all very afraid to go, hey, we want missions. So we actually proposed an incredibly low-cost program, essentially, as part of this series of we kept our eye on the budget, and we didn't really propose anything that was too wild. The goal of this particular set was to determine on-ramps for commercial involvement. We looked at near-term options that could be feasibly carried out in the next 5 years. And we attempted to break up the candidate missions into various capability bins, and one of them explicitly called out was nighttime survival. So we decided to say, okay, here's the goal we want to achieve, and then here's 5 ways of escalating complexity you can address that partially or wholly. We did not attempt to prioritize these missions, but this group was a subset of the ASM SAT group and was influenced by the deliberations of the first activity. So we just gone through 2 days of intensive discussions of what were the most important things to do on the lunar surface in the near term, and this is what came out of that activity. They were understand lunar magnetic anomalies, understand the origin and age of the quote-unquote irregular Mare patches, which are interesting volcanic features on the moon, understand the structure of the lunar interior, understand the composition, physical state, form, distribution, and context of volatiles for science and exploration purposes, and understand the bombardment history of the inner solar system. And as you looked across all of these high priority candidate mission types, there were some cross-cutting things that came to the surface. And one of them was that there was a lot of desires for multiple long-lived rovers capable of nighttime survival, and the emplacement of surface networks with nighttime survival capabilities. And finally, we had the Lunar Science for Landed Missions workshop in early 2018, which produced a nice figure, but I'm choosing to use the famous Clyde Neal figure instead because it's very colorful, and Clyde is sitting right in front of me. And the point of this particular figure is to demonstrate that there are a lot of places on the moon where you can make fundamental science advances for the entire solar system. And in any given scenario, unless you're going to the poles, and even if you're going to the poles, you're going to have to engage in activities that require you to survive in lunar night. So as one example of what something could look like, so this is some work we've done recently trying to figure out how you would operate a rover to understand lunar volcanism. These are Isis and Osiris, 2 very small cones, not so far away from the Apollo 11 landing site. And in this scenario, this is a relatively simple, straightforward mission that would still require about 4 weeks surface time. So you'd have to operate through a day-night cycle. You'd start at Isis, you'd explore that, you'd drive up Isis, you'd look at what kind of scatter cone it is, and then you'd proceed to Osiris and do the same kind of activity. That's a relatively simple, straightforward mission. And as you move farther, there are other locations on the moon where these sorts of activities become significantly more complicated. Horizon domes, the Marius Hills, the Aristarchus Plateau. To do the science we want to do on the moon requires nighttime survival. So I would point out a couple of things here. First of all, surviving and operating through the lunar night is critical for accomplishing key science and exploration objectives. This has been amply documented numerous times by the community over the past decade, most recently last year, 3 times. We need a long-lived, uncrewed rover or a series of rovers to fully address some of these high-priority science concepts, and that rover would have to survive the lunar night. Stationary geophysical network comes up a lot, as the stationary lunar exosphere analysis station and astrophysics observatory. So that's the science perspective, and I think I will take any questions you might have at this time. Great, everybody agrees. Fantastic. So I think Ben is going to be up next, so he should probably start wandering up.
Oh, Barbara's going to ask you a question.
Oh, Barbara's asking a question. Okay, great.
Sam, I noticed you don't have a sample return up there, and that might be a casualty of us not asking for really what we want.
Yes.
What benefits do you think surviving the night would have for sample return mission that we traditionally think of as having very quick surface activity?
Well, it depends on how you do it. If you went the route of that we seem to be going down for the Mars activity, where you have a rover that's actually collecting the samples, and you're doing it over a large geographic expanse, by definition, the rover would have to do it every night. A stationary sample return mission, I don't know. The Russians did that very successfully in only 3 Earth days when they did it in the 70s, and there's no scenario where I think a stationary mission would have to survive the night, unless the spacecraft itself
vehicle is going to act as a node in the long geophysical network.
Sure, I think I agree with you in terms of the mechanics, but we know for those samples that were collected by the Russians, we didn't have great geologic context for them until LRO, right? And so I think having some of these kinds of assets on a lander that had the return samples could give you the context for those samples. So I think you could easily add.
We could add sample return. Yeah, okay. We'll do that for tomorrow's talk.
I didn't hear too much about the commercial lunar payload system. Is that something that is in the back of your mind? Is that something that's a vehicle that you could use to put some of these missions?
Well, all of these are implementation. First of all, again, we didn't actually talk about the implementation here. So one of the on-ramps that was identified, in theory, could be, these missions could fly to the moon on a, we don't really care how it gets there.
How are we doing? Can we then break then panel?
I think we should do that.
Okay, right.
Do you have slides?
I do. I loaded.
Okay, so next I want to welcome Ben Bussey, who will be giving us the exploration perspective for the Lunar. And then after Ben's talk, we will do the break, which is a little bit different from what it says in the agenda, and then we'll come back and we'll do the panel.
People will need a break after
Maybe even during.
I won't be showing the famous Clyde Neal figure, because for the infamous Clyde Neal figure, so not safe for work. All right, so I want to give you the exploration perspective. Talk about two things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we have coming up over the next decade, so that as we think about what we want to do by surviving the night, we look at the opportunities where we might have a chance to survive the night. And so, I mean, concentrating on the lander element, everyone in the room is familiar probably with the small commercial lander payload that's going on. They should start flying relatively soon. They're likely to start off fairly modest and then get more capable with time. We'll hear more about the commercials later. We're then looking at mid-sized robotic landers in the early 2020s, progressing to larger scale landers in the late 2020s. So just thinking about when will we actually have a chance to survive the night. And then in orbit, the first element of the gateway, the power propulsion element, is scheduled to go up in 2022. And I mention that because it will have a communication relay capability, so that surface assets after 2022 could land somewhere and not need a ComSat. They could land on the far side or some of the polar regions and still be able to communicate to Earth. There's one less thing to worry about. Right, strategic knowledge apps. They're meant to define information that is useful or mandatory for designing human space-flight architecture. They have a very high profile. They come up a lot. The perception is that the SKGs have to be closed in order to go to a destination, and that they represent requirements. And sadly, my scream emoji has turned into something a little bit still unhappy looking. And the requirement, all the engineers in the room, requirements is a very bad word. And so don't worry, they're not really requirements. In reality, there's very little information that you absolutely must have before we go somewhere with humans. The vast majority, it's simply buying down risk or helping you to design smarter. So really, three flavors of SKGs. There are, depending on your destination, there is the has to have. There are the potential to have requirements. For the lunar surface, I don't think we have that. The majority fall under buys down risk, lets you design smarter. The example here is the lunar module foot pads are actually much larger and heavier than they need to be. And that's because we didn't know the bearing strength of the regolith. So if you can get certain key engineering relevant information early, you can design smaller, cheaper, lighter, etc. And finally, there are mission enhancing. And for the moon, this predominantly refers to resources. And we keep 4 sets of SKGs going: Lunar, Phobos, Deimos, Mars, and near-Earth objects. What I'm going to do, and only put these up to then promote discussion, is talk very briefly about the lunar ones, and specifically I'll try to highlight the ones that I think either have to be addressed in darkness or certainly taking some measurements in darkness
are an aspect of it. So we have three themes of lunar SKG. There's understand the lunar resource potential, understand the lunar environment and its effect on human life, and understand how to work and live on the lunar surface. And we actually have a very nice shiny web page now that you can go almost with animations, but we're not quite that cool. And then you can actually download a PowerPoint version, or if you really want to, very detailed spreadsheet. Okay, so theme 1, understanding the lunar resource potential. And not surprisingly, the vast majority of these relate to potential for using of polar volatiles, and therefore taking measurements in the dark is required. And so there are only very few that aren't. Conversely, theme 2, understand the lunar environment and the effects on human life. This is things like solar event prediction, radiation shielding. There isn't really anything here that you require taking those measurements in darkness in order to get the data that you need. And then theme 3, understand how to work and live on the lunar surface. This is a bit more of a smash. So you've got excavation for lunar resources, transportation. Those are things that you're probably, depending on your resource, you'll want to do in either daylight or darkness. And certainly one of the questions we have are the geotechnical properties of either shadowed or permanently shadowed regolith that different to normal Highland regolith. And so autonomous surface navigation, so if we're going to do lots of roving in the dark, that's a skill we're going to have to learn. How is that different? We heard earlier that maybe if you've got earth shine and sensitive cameras, you may, as long as you can operate, the navigation side may not be a problem. Then we've got the near-surface plasma environment. How is that different? Obviously, it's different inside a permanently shadowed region if you can't, never seeing the sun, and that affects as you charge up from roving. If you've got no plasma, you can't discharge. You might actually charge to an unhealthy amount. So that might actually affect how you operate. And so actually measuring these things in the shadow is going to be is key. Okay, so given the fact this is a panel, I threw in discussion points. And so many SKGs can be addressed with relatively small, low-cost instruments, which I think is key, particularly with the initial the clips landed. I think we have an opportunity to actually address some of these things quite quickly. As Sam touched upon, we really do need to get to the surface in order to answer the vast majority of these. One thought I had is, should we be developing or considering a standard package that we attempt to fly on every polar surface mission? What data sets really benefit from getting them from a variety of locations, as opposed to those data sets where actually a point measurement in one or two places is probably more than ample. The other thing I think we should be thinking about is how much time in shadow is required for the different measurements. And Brett touched upon this. Survive the night doesn't necessarily mean that you need to survive 236 hours-ish in order to take your measurement. So particularly when you're taking measurements at the poles, how much time do you actually need in the shadowed region to take the measurement that you want? Can you dip in with a roving platform, take your measurement? If you need to drill subsurface, it may be single digit or tens of hours, but there are lots of stuff at the poles where you don't have to have, and when people here survive the night, probably 90% of people automatically think 14 and a bit Earth days. And I want people to, as we discuss this, I want to think about the stuff that we want to get at the poles, particularly because they're SKG related, where actually you don't need to survive that long, but you do need to go into somewhere that's quite cold. And of course, it can mean infinity. If there is stuff that, if you wanted for any reason, say a geophysical measurement in a permanently shadowed region, then you're going to need power to survive indefinitely. And one of the things here is how will we get better at providing instrumentation at short notice as opportunities arise, and that is something that as part of CLIP that we are working on being able to prepare. And with that, you can now form a line at the rest. Or a line at the microphone, which isn't what I was planning.
Pamela Clark, JPL. A variation of how much time you need to survive.
I didn't get echo.
I really need to do something about the audio system. Is what kind of a duty cycle can you operate on? So you can play the game of limited duty cycles, snapshots during the night, so you're not using maximum power. all the time. That's another option to look at. It's like maximum amount of time in one fell swoop.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big difference, which I'm sure we're going to touch upon that. There's simply staying alive so you can play another day in the sunshine versus actually needing to operate your instruments or road during the darkness. Fundamentally, well, there's different requirements.
Ben, great presentation. Elliot Carroll from Lunar Resources. One comment about your theme 1 is that you don't mention the vacuum on the moon, which could be probably the most critical resource on the moon to use to survive the lunar night. Does do you guys plan to explore that option?
The
vacuum on the moon.
So explain to the audience and me why that's really helpful.
Number 1, you can do vacuum deposition on the moon to create energy, and number 2, you can utilize the vacuum to make use superconducting wires to store energy.
Okay, well, I'm sure that'll be part of the panel discussion.
I'm free.
Wait, don't run free yet.
Oh, don't run free. I'll run free.
Okay, so I think right now we're going to do a 20-minute break, so come back at 10:15. We will start our panel discussion, and if during the break my 4 panelists can just come tag up with me real quick, that'd be great. Thank you. So far, so see how the panel discussion is.
Yeah, here we only have 4.
One, two, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2.